Okay, everyone, I'm calling the Champaign County Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Would the clerks please call the roll?
Mitchell. Here. Quisenberry. Here. Rector. Here. Rosales.
Present.
Schrader. Schwartz. Shore.
Present.
Weibel. Alex. Anderson. Bergson. Carter. Cowart. Esri.
Here.
Harper. Harrison. Hartke.
Here.
Jay. Maxwell. McGuire. Michaels. Petrie.
Present. A motion to approve the agenda and the addendum for this evening.
So moved.
Mr. Mitchell, and a second by Mr. Quisenberry. Mr. Alex, do you have a correction?
I have a change. I would like to delete under finance item D6. That's budget amendment 15-65. That is moot.
Thank you. Any other changes or corrections to the agenda? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right, thank you very much. Approval of the minutes, a motion to do so. Mr. Rosales, Mr. Carter, a second. Thank you very much. Any corrections or changes to the minutes? All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right, unanimous. Presently, I have no slips for public participation. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak to the board this evening? Seeing none, we'll close public participation. Board communications. Mr. Rosales.
I have one communication, and that is this Friday will be the kickoff of the Martin Luther King celebrations countywide. So today, this Friday, will be the 15th annual Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. countywide celebration. It will be held at Parkland in the U building. This is a new location. I just want you to realize that it is at Parkland, not at the Hawthorne Suites or the Hilton, I believe. It was being held, Hilton Garden. And it will be from 4 to 5 will be a keynote presenter, and that is Catherine Harris, that'll be performing the Harriet Tubman writings. So that is something remarkable to see, and there'll be a reception following, sponsored by everybody in the county, I guess.
Everybody in the
and I'm
world.
going to pass out these flyers and posters for those that may want to take one with you. You may. And it's online as well in all the municipalities, both Urbana, Champaign, University, and County, and as well as the YMCA. I've seen it announced. WDWS has announced it as well as other news outlets and media.
Thank you, Mr. Rosales. This year, Mr. Rosales is serving as the county board representative, and last year, as a reminder, it was Ms. Cowart who was representing the county at this celebration. I have not a communication, but sending around the sign-up sheet for readings or prayers for the county board meeting. We have a few empty slots for those of you who would like to do this at the county board meetings. And next is Ms. Bergson. Do you want to come up and take care of Justice and Social Services?
Okay, the renewal of the county board contract with Community Elements for the reentry programming.
All right. Are you entertaining a motion for that?
Yeah.
Mr. Harkey there? A second? Mr. McGuire, go ahead.
Hmm?
Any kind,
Well, any
questions?
discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay. And then the monthly reports. We accept them,
They're placed on file.
place them, accept them and place them on file.
Okay.
So moved. All in favor? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Any other business?
You have
We got
other
none.
business? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And
Mr. Alex has a
yeah.
question for you.
Madam Chair, could we get an update on applications for the Racial Justice Task Force, please?
there are 30 applications. We were going to meet today, but other things intervened, so we'll meet Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berkson. Next, Mr. Quisenberry.
Good evening, everyone. For policy personnel and appointments, we are going to start out with a piece of information in your packet. You should have received the list of county board appointments expiring in 2016. It's a long and expansive list. I ask you to take a look at it, particularly for the districts that are out in the rural areas. I ask our rural representatives to be encouraging people to get involved and volunteer for this kind of work. So we know it's not always easy work, but we need people. We do still, I think, have a number of positions that are open where we haven't been able to find people to fill them.
May I add something?
Yes, Ms. Petrie, go ahead.
I just, excuse me, want to remind everyone we'll have 2 appointments coming up on the Board of Review. And this year, the appointments will be 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. It's the way it cycles, and then the next year it's just 1 appointment. So
Those are in May, if I remember correctly.
May, correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell has a question.
Yes.
The folks that are on the Board of Review are currently appraisers. They have appraiser license. And are they interested in continuing? Or are they wishing to move on?
I will answer that for you. Mark is ready to move back to the business with his father, and he has let me know that. The other wants to be reappointed. Okay?
All right. So moving right along, our first appointment that we actually have to do something for is for the Harward and Kerr Drainage District, a commissioner for an unexpired term ending August 31st, 2018.
Yes, Todd Hesterberg.
Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Harper. Any questions or discussion?
May I just?
Yes, Ms. Petrie?
Just want to note for all of you, Mr. Hesterberg did have his application in on time, but due to all of the flooding and tornadoes we had, the attorney for this drainage district, it was in a stack on his desk, so we only got it recently, and that's why it appears to be very behind the schedule.
All right. I'll call a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. That passes unanimously. Next, for the Nursing Home Board of Directors, an unexpired term ending November 30th of 2017. Madam Chair.
It's Edward Sutton.
Do I have a second? Mr. Maxwell, seconds. Any questions or discussion?
May I add?
Yes, Ms. Petrie.
Just an explanation on this one. Again, this was an application that was in on time. Unfortunately, in scheduling a conversation with them to bring it forward to you all in a timely manner, Mr. Sutton had 2 trips already planned, and so he and I were only able to have a conversation last week.
All right, thank you. Questions, Mr. Alex?
Looking at his resume, I look forward to seeing what a PhD in physics from Caltech and Berkeley can do for the nursing home. Hopefully, he'll be able to help us figure some things out over there.
Yeah, maybe you can explain the ozone cleaning to folks. I'm not sure. All right, any other comments or questions or points of humor? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. That also passes unanimously. Next, we'll move into Section B, which is the area for the county clerk. You should have both December 2015's report and the semi-annual report. Our county clerk is here this evening. If you have any questions, he can answer them. If you have no questions, I will accept those and place them on file. And then I will need, you have at your desk in this teal-colored packet the proposal for our polling places for this year, and I will need a motion, Mr. Esri, to move that resolution establishing polling places. Do I have a second? Mr. Shore seconds that, and since the clerk is here, if the board has any questions regarding this, I encourage them now. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Weibel. Thank you, Mr. Holden, for joining us.
Just sort of curious, I see that City of Champaign 6, City of Champaign 10 are being moved. What was the problem with us using the Spalding Rec Center?
I believe the Park District has plans to redevelop Spalding Park and the Recreation Center, and they don't know whether those redevelopment plans will be short-term or long-term.
This could be, we could move back someday, maybe.
Maybe, although the facility we've located in CC 6 and 10 is the beautiful new Church of the Living God. It's a great facility, and, you know, unless there's an issue there in future years, I can't imagine why we would want to move out.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions? Ms. Petrie?
Well, I would like Mr. Holton just to bring everybody up to speed on some of the things we had to consider in relationship to the ADA requirements.
The United States Department of Justice, of course, entered into a settlement agreement with Champaign County covering all of our facilities. Included in those, in the Department of Justice settlement agreement, are polling places. They're considered county facilities for Election Day. So we attempt to locate facilities that are as accessible as possible. The Department of Justice has a very binary standard for accessibility, though. A facility is either accessible by all measures and on every measure, or it is inaccessible to them. So for 2016's elections, we are taking temporary measures at all of our polling places. Whether our architect found them to be accessible or not, we're taking temporary measures to make them all temporarily accessible on Election Day. We're going to offer curbside voting on demand through some additional signage at our polling places, so that if anybody has a physical disability that prevents them from entering our polling places, they'll be able to contact us, and we'll be able to bring a ballot to them at their car, and they can vote in their car, and then the election judges can take it back in the facility and they can vote.
All right.
Thank you.
Was that all you had, Patsy? Okay, Mr. Anderson.
Question about Rantoul. I think it's 1 and 5 are being moved over to a new location, the Methodist Church. Now, 1 and 5 are long-term or long-time voting places. How do we inform, or how do you inform the public, just to make sure people aren't going to the wrong place to start with?
Every time we make a permanent change in a polling place, and the changes we're asking you to make tonight are permanent changes to polling places, we'll mail new cards to every registered voter in the precinct. So they'll all get a new card that will tell them where their new polling place is, and then the next election that occurs after the change, about a week before the election, we'll mail them an additional letter that will let them know, bring it to their attention, especially your polling place has changed, your new location is, its address is, if you'd like to vote early, if you'd like to vote by mail. And then we're required to notice polling places in all of the election notices that we provide by law for every election.
And I know it's simple, but does somebody hang a sign on the old place saying, hey?
Yes, and we hang a sign on the old place
Thank
saying,
you.
if you're coming here to vote, please go here instead.
All right, Lorraine.
Let's see, Church of the Living God has got 2 city precincts in it. Why is that?
City of Champaign 6 and City of Champaign 10 have voted together for years. They both voted at Spalding Recreation Center. So we're keeping them together just at Church of the Living God instead of at Spalding Recreation Center. And we did that at the request of the Park District, who advised us that Spalding Recreation Center would no longer be available to us.
Okay, other questions? Seeing none, I always encourage people to vote early, and then you don't have to worry about it, because that's what I do. That's for Chicago. Are we ready to vote if there's no more questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. That also passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Holden. Next, Section C from the Geographic Information System Consortium, also known as GIS. We have a request for the GIS technician position to be reviewed by the Job Content Evaluation Committee. I'll entertain a motion for that. Mr. Esri moves, and I need a second. Mr. Anderson seconds. And to remind you all that what this means is that the criteria, the information about the position goes to this committee, and they will investigate and determine whether it's classified properly, and then send us back their recommendation, which we have one of those later in the on the agenda. So any questions? Seeing none, and when we vote on this, it goes to the Job Content Evaluation Committee. This is the last stop before it gets evaluated. So, yes, Ms. Berkson.
Is this on the circuit clerk?
No, this is for GIS. We'll get to the circuit clerk in a little bit here. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. That motion passes. Next, moving on to the county administrator. You should have the Administrative Services December 2015 report. Now would be the time to ask Ms. Busey questions if you have questions about that or comments. Seeing none, I will accept that and place that on file. And now, Ms. Berkson, we have the recommendation back from the Job Content Evaluation Committee for the Director of Operations position from the Clerk's office, and you should have the recommendation in your teal or whatever color this is packet here. And so I would entertain a motion to approve that recommendation. Mr. Harper moves. Do I have a second? Mr. Rosales seconds. And so since we get to do the whole life cycle of these things tonight, that's what happens when they come back. The policy committee approves it, personnel committee approves it, and then if it requires a change that involves budget, it comes before finance, which is when we'll see this again tonight. And we have the circuit clerk here. So any questions about the outcome of the evaluation from the Job Content Committee? Ms. Berkson.
My question is why, among all these qualifications that are for a sedentary job pretty much, suddenly it tosses in lift or move up to 50 pounds, which just disqualifies a wide range of people that I think could do that job.
Ms. Blakeman, can you speak to that?
As we were completing the questionnaire, that we were thinking of the general duties of anyone who works in our office. There are a lot of files and things that can be moved, but if we had a candidate with a physical disability, we would certainly make any accommodation possible to have that person fill the position.
Well, do they get to see this in advance? Because if so, disabled people would not apply.
Ms. Busey, do you?
Absolutely.
This would not be included in the job posting. It is in a job description, so the job descriptions are available online. But the job posting would focus on what the primary areas of expertise and qualifications are would not include this particular area. So I think it's very possible that a person who couldn't lift 50 pounds, if they were really interested in the position, would still go ahead and apply because reasonable accommodations can be made for something like that.
May I ask how often a person in your office, the director of operations, would lift 50 pounds?
I can't say how often that position, because it's a new position, but almost every person in my office lifts a fair amount of weight pretty much daily. We have buckets of files and things like that.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosales?
Katie, you usually put the EEO statement and affirmative action statement at the bottom of those job
Yes,
postings?
absolutely.
Okay, sure, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. That passes. All right, and let's see. I don't believe I don't, is there other business? I don't have any other business. Seeing no other business, I do not have a chair's report for this evening on anything specific. I would say that for consent agenda, we have A23 and B3. Do you agree? All right, thank you. That's all for policy.
Thank you, Mr. Quisenberry. Mr. Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First item on the agenda under finance is, as usual, the treasurer's report. I will accept and place it on file. If anyone has any questions for Mr. Welch or he would like to make any comments, now would be the time to do so.
No particular comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, we will place that on file and we'll, Mr. Carter? I'm sorry, Mr. Carter? I'm sorry, I'm not. Oh, sorry, yeah, no, I'm not. Okay, sorry, Lloyd. So we'll take that treasurer's report, place it on file. We may have a motion to approve resolution, send to the full board with the recommendation for approval. Resolution authorizing cancellation of certificate of purchase on a mobile home permanent parcel number 15-25-55 and the same resolution for permanent parcel 30-56-118. Mr. Jay and Mr. McGuire. Any discussion, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll move on to the auditor's report. I believe the auditor is not here tonight, so we will accept and place that report on file. And note that the GFOA awarded their certificate of excellence for the most recent CAFR audit. So we've gotten that many years in a row, and it's good to see that continue. We'll move on to the nursing home. We have the monthly financial report in the packet. Any comments or questions about that or the nursing home in general?
Is Mr. Gima still here?
Mr. Gima was here, is he? Oh,
Yes.
they're hiding. So we have a question. If Scott, has anybody got any questions for Mr. Gima? Looks like yes. Ms. Petrie.
If Mr. Gima would just briefly review for the whole board that last reading the tea leaves report that you handed out at the nursing home board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jack has a copy. Good.
And the report is in this green packet. Sorry, the monthly report is in the green packet.
So this document that I presented to the Board of Directors last night is called fiscal year 2016 budget impasse, trying to read the tea leaves. This was not drafted by myself, but it was drafted by a gentleman by the name of Matt Warner, who is a consultant, lobbyist that works for Leading Age, a not-for-profit organization in Illinois. And I presented this to the board of directors to give some clarification. At least when I read this, it gave me more clarification of how dire the situation is in Springfield in terms of cash flow and the ability for the comptroller to pay bills on an ongoing basis. So if you take a look at Table 1, all the numbers you see there are in millions of dollars. So the first line, which is GRF or...
Scott, we don't have this report.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're going to need to give us more
Okay.
context.
All right, so on June 30th of 2015, which was the end of the state fiscal year, the state had $621 million in the bank. That is equivalent to 6 to 7 days of cash for the state, based on estimated general revenue funds of $32 billion estimated for 2016. That number of $621 million has not changed materially as of December 31st, 2015. So again, just to hit this point home, 6 to 7 days of cash on hand on any given day. Right now, the state is required to spend $34.4 billion for items such as Medicaid or other items that are being covered under court action or consent decrees, and that includes Medicaid payments to providers, including Champaign County Nursing Home, which means, knock on wood, we are receiving our Medicaid payments, and we have been receiving those on a monthly basis. But the estimated general revenue that the state expects for fiscal year 2016 is $32.1 billion. So there is an ongoing deficit of $2.3 billion. We started the beginning of fiscal year 2016 already behind by $4.4 billion of unpaid 2015 bills. So if you add the 4.4 to the 2.3, we are now at $6.7 billion in a budget deficit. Now, again, Champaign County Nursing Home is lucky because we have been receiving our Medicaid payments. There are other institutions, organizations that have not been paid a penny so far this year, and that accounts for about $4.2 billion that hasn't been spent because of the lack of a budget. So now we have a budget deficit of 10.9, almost $11 billion that the state is trying to deal with. So the point I was hitting home with the board of directors, and I'll hit home with you, is when the comptroller has roughly 6 to 7 days cash on hand, what is occurring with the comptroller is basically putting out fires on a daily basis. And I also had a conversation with Senator Chapin Rose right before the holidays, and he basically reiterated the same thing, that if an entity has problems making payroll within the next week or two, the comptroller will cut an emergency check. But that's basically how business is being run right now in Champaign. So the takeaway from that is I have not been able to get a meeting with the comptroller. I don't anticipate that I'll be able to get a meeting with the comptroller to get some kind of special consideration for Champaign County Nursing Home. And basically, in no uncertain terms, Senator Rose and every other contact that I've had has said basically everybody is on their own in terms of trying to weather this storm. Now, if there is a $2.3 billion deficit just based on estimated revenues with the consent decree payments that have to be made this year, everyone is saying there will be a payment delay. Unequivocally, there will be a payment delay. It's just a matter of when it's going to take place. And so if we are not going to get any special consideration from the comptroller, it means that we're going to have to take care of handling our cash needs ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Gima. Any questions? That leads into a discussion we'll be having later tonight on the finance agenda. No questions? Thank you, Scott. We'll accept your report and place it on file and appreciate the additional information. We'll move on to budget amendments and transfers. I have a motion to send to the full board with a recommendation for approval, budget transfer 15-9, $4,500 from the circuit clerk's office to cover the cost of court-ordered legal notices and advertising to the end of fiscal year 2015. Mr. Esri and Ms. Michaels. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Same for budget transfer 15-10, $3,000 for end-of-year salary expenses in the state's attorney's office. Again, these are all for the fiscal year 2015, the former budget. We have a motion to send that to the full board. Mr. Rector, second. Mr. Anderson. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. We have a motion to send budget transfer 15-11 for $10 to the law library to cover an IMRF shortage. Mr. Esri and Mr. Carter, any discussion? Please no. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. May I have a motion for budget amendment 15-54, increased appropriations of $4,029, increased revenue of $4,029 for the sheriff, accepting a private donation for the purchase of bulletproof vests for canines. Mr. J and Mr. Esri, any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Budget amendment 15-64, $4,500 in increased appropriation from the fund balance for the state's attorney's office for end-of-year educational and witness expenses. May I have a motion? Mr. Hartke, second by Mr. Anderson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Item 6 has been removed from the agenda. May I have a motion for budget amendment 15-69, increased appropriations of $4,705, increased revenue of $4,705 for the treasurer's property tax interest fee account to deal with money accumulated above the budgeted figure. Motion by Ms. Michaels, seconded by Mr. Harper. Discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And finally, this budget amendment for fiscal year 16 budget is a 16-1, decreased appropriations of $27,352 to the fund balance to adjust the 2016 budget to account for items which were actually purchased in 2015. May I have a motion? Mr. Carter and Mr. Hartke? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Move on to the circuit clerk. This is the finance side of the request that was approved earlier at the policy committee regarding the director of operations position. And this would amend the schedule of authorized positions to create this position. Ms. Blakeman is still here if anybody has questions. May I have a motion to send this to the full board with a recommendation for approval? Mr. Esri and Mr. Anderson. Any discussion or questions for Ms. Blakeman? Mr. Hartke.
A quick question, and I don't know if Katie answered it. Is this increased headcount or is this headcount neutral? This is an increase in headcount?
This is a newly created position. However, by the end of fiscal year 16, we anticipate that the total number of FTEs will remain the same.
You're going to have somebody retire and not replace them? That's what you're hoping for?
I can discuss personnel in open session, but yeah. Well,
And this is not this will not be a increase in your budget, is that correct?
we also do not.
You expect savings elsewhere in the budget to accommodate this position?
Ultimately, that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for circuit clerk? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the information technology. We have a request to approve the renewal of the enterprise licensing agreement with Microsoft for county software. May I have a recommendation to send this to the full board, or a motion to send this to the full board with a recommendation for approval? Mr. Carter, second. I'll go give this one to Mr. Weibel. Andy Rhodes is here to discuss what this means and how it will benefit us and how much it's going to cost.
First, let me apologize for just bringing this to your attention now. It's been very difficult to get CDWG and Microsoft in a room with us to talk to us about our licensing. For the last several years, ever since our last enterprise agreement, we've been working with CDWG and Microsoft to try and figure out how best to license all the smartphones that people are getting their email on, which is a lot of our management personnel here at the county. And we've also been letting employees use Microsoft Outlook web app to access email through a web browser. Microsoft would like us to license those products now. We have not had licenses for them before. In order to do that, the most economical way to achieve the licensing is to switch from a per-device licensing scheme, which is historically what we've used, to a per-user licensing scheme, which means we need to add about 101 additional licenses to our Microsoft Enterprise Licensing Agreement. In addition, IT would like to has made some changes to the way we're utilizing Microsoft server technology that allows us to basically virtualize all our servers, which aids us in disaster recovery and making our systems more highly available. In order to accommodate the changes that we've made to our server structure, we need to change our server licensing as well. So the combination of those two adds about $100,000 a year to our Microsoft licensing. But it's necessary in order to accommodate these initiatives that we've been engaged in for the last few years. As part of these changes, we'll also be getting Office 365, which is a cloud-based version of Microsoft Office. It'll allow management personnel and other designated employees to utilize their county Microsoft Office license on up to 5 additional devices besides their desktop computer. So for instance, the sheriff's office can install it on smartphones that they use, on tablet computers that they use, as well as on their desktop computers. If they need to install it on their home computer, they can do that as well. We'll also have available to us OneDrive for Business, which gives each designated employee 1 terabyte of storage in the Microsoft cloud. That they can share documents in that storage with any other person on the county account. So it'll facilitate collaboration on the part of many offices. And then we're also going to be getting Exchange Online, which will move our email system to the Microsoft cloud as well. That'll relieve a substantial burden on county IT. Maintaining our email system is quite cumbersome for us to do. It was also an initiative of the county board as part of their strategic plan.
Thanks, Andy. We'll start with Mr. Quisenberry.
Yeah, so Andy, I'm glad to see this, as you probably expected. That is one of our strategic plan items, to get some of the stuff that we do in IT that's considered more a commodity service, to move to use those commodity services, so our resources, which are limited in IT, we only have so many IT people and a lot of things to do. They don't have to worry about running an Exchange server anymore. Microsoft does that for us, and they can focus on installing a new accounting system or supporting the judicial system, whatever. This is a step forward. I'd also like to point out that this is not just, a purchase that is all new stuff. Some of this is compliance. When we do things with licensing, we have an agreement, it goes for a certain number of years, and when that agreement runs out and you're ready to re-up with someone like a Microsoft, they come back and say, well, how much are you using now? And in the meantime, you tend to use more, which is a simple fact, or you use things that sometimes you didn't know that you needed to license it, sometimes their policy changes over time, and now you do need to license it. Part of this is moving to the cloud so that we're not buying new servers every 4 or 5 years. Part of this is bringing ourselves into compliance. And part of this is actually new capabilities with people using multiple devices to get to the same stuff for convenience. That's just a value add from this standpoint.
And that's correct. Part of the renewal of the agreement also allows us to spread the cost over a 3-year period, Whereas if we were to have paid for these technologies when we started using them 2 or 3 years ago, we would have had to have paid in the middle of the cycle, and it would have cost us more money. This way, we've been able to use the technologies for free for a couple of years, decide that they're good for our environment, and then split the cost out over the next 3 years.
So one of the things I wanted to get to was, if we're going to be paying more in this license agreement, that's no doubt about it. But what you might not notice, and I hope Andy will call this out when it happens, is that as we go forward, there are going to be equipment replacement that we're going to avoid, and we should be notified. We don't have to buy a new Exchange server this year because we did this, and that means we're avoiding $35,000 worth of costs this year. So there are a number of things like that. Likewise, I assume as we move over, that makes equipment available, so any other demands that we had on processing power cycles, we can reuse that equipment right away to solve a new problem without having to go out and buy new equipment. Is that fair to say?
The Exchange servers were purchased a couple of years ago, I believe. We came to you in the summer because we were having problems with the email server, and you authorized the purchase of 2 additional email servers for us. So those will be recycled and put back into use in our regular server farm as soon as we go live with Exchange Online.
And that means purchases we don't have to make for demands that we have in the future. So I'm going to support this.
Thank you. Any other questions for Andy or Deb? Mr. McGuire.
Thanks, James, for that explanation of that. So how much of a cost is this? I mean, I see the list of numbers through 32,000, 42,000, 32,000.
Yeah, Deb, do you want to talk about the budget amendments? If this is approved tonight, we'll bring these budget amendments to the county board meeting, since they weren't able to be prepared in time to be acted on tonight. Deb can talk about the overall impact.
I believe the overall increase is right at about $111,000 for all funds in the county. Is that correct, Andy?
I got 98.6
Okay.
after we
After you
evaluated the
reconfigured
server
it.
licensing.
So what you're seeing here are the budget amendments that will be required to cover everything that we pay out of the Capital Asset Replacement Fund. And the funds come either from general corporate or public safety sales tax to cover technology in the Capital Asset Replacement Fund. So yes, it's $32,725 increase coming from the general corporate fund balance and a $42,706 increase that will be coming from the public safety sales tax fund balance. We don't know at this time exactly how all of the other funds will manage it, which would include the nursing home, courts automation, potentially RPC. Some of those funds may be able to absorb the increase that they're faced with. Hopefully we'll have a better handle on that by the county board meeting next week.
So our overall licensing cost in last year's budget was about $115,000. With the changes to the agreement, it'll be about $213,000 per year.
Mr. Weibel?
These costs, should we expect them to go up every year, or they sort of go like 3 or 4 years, then they go up?
These will be stable for 3 years, and then we'll
Okay.
renegotiate the agreement.
Okay.
And some of these technologies that we're paying for over the next 3 years will move into, if they're still offered, because that's typically how Microsoft works. They offer the technologies for 4 or 5 years, and then they move into something new. Provided the server technologies, the data center server technologies, and the systems center server technologies are still offered by Microsoft, then they'll move into a category called software assurance, where we basically just pay for a nominal annual fee for upgrades and enhancements to the product. The initial licensing is covered under the first 3 years of the agreement.
Mr. Maxwell, and then Ms. Court.
Yes, do we place any controls over our staff as to who can use these services, and also as to who can get these new devices and add the additional licensing? Thank you.
Yes, all smartphones have to be approved by the department head before we add them to email. And as we roll out Office 365, each department head will get to decide who gets the licenses to use at home and who doesn't. So everybody will get one on their desktop computer here at work, but your basic clerical staff person won't get additional licenses to use outside of work.
Ms. Court?
Yes, to any of the departments that's going to be using this, do they pay anything toward the increasing cost?
Some of them do. The general corporate fund departments will be doing a budget amendment to cover those, but the special revenue funds pay their own licensing, so they'll be paying the increase.
Anybody else? If not, I have a couple of questions. We had this disaster a couple of years ago with the email servers related to the judiciary where they couldn't access their email and migration problems and so forth. This essentially makes those types of problems a thing of the past in theory, right? The email will be served.
Email will be served through
elsewhere
through the internet. Microsoft has a 99.9% uptime for Exchange Online. There are occasionally times where they have similar issues to what we have, where a patch gets applied incorrectly or something and takes part of their cloud down, but they have enough redundancy built into their cloud that it should mitigate a lot of the issues like that. As long as our internet connection is up and we don't have problems on our internal network accessing the internet, then people should have a much more reliable and responsive email experience.
And these are not restricted to only be accessed from within county buildings. So if we did have an internet outage or natural disaster type scenario, county employees could operate essentially from anywhere that they could get an internet connection. Is that
correct?
Is that correct?
That's the beauty of Office 365, OneDrive for Business, and Exchange Online as a combination, is it allows you to work from anywhere where there's an internet connection.
But does that imply that we're going to start moving things that are currently stored locally out into the cloud so they are more accessible, or is this sort of going forward we may start to use this stuff?
I'm going to talk to the department heads on how they want to use OneDrive for Business. It would seem logical in some of the offices where they would want to share a set of documents, you know, like the state's attorney's office might want to make the charging documents available in the cloud so that all the assistant state's attorneys can get to those. Similarly, there might be, you know, investigative report forms that the sheriff's office wants to make available. But for the most part, I don't envision a large-scale movement of our file storage to the cloud at this point.
Okay, and that's a great lead into my last question, which is, you know, we've looked at this sort of general approach in the past, and I know there have been regulatory or legal concerns about storage of documents related to court cases and so forth in the cloud. Have we, you know, investigated all of the relevant regulations, and are we sure that we're not going to run afoul of any either Supreme Court rules or laws or requirements as far as law enforcement storing data in the cloud, judges, lawyers storing data in the cloud, this type of thing?
At this point, the technology is mature enough that I don't think we will. Microsoft and Google, for the most part, say that they're CJIS compliant. CJIS is the Criminal Justice Information System, which is the sharing of law enforcement and legal data that you're not supposed to do unless you're operating in a secure environment. However, they will caution you that if the county is the administrator of our Office 365 and OneDrive plan makes everybody an administrator, then you can throw CJIS compliance out the window because you've just given everybody the rights to get to everything. So a lot of it depends on how we implement these solutions as opposed to the solutions themselves. One of the things that Exchange Online does offer us is better encryption of email, which will go a long way towards CJIS compliance and also HIPAA compliance.
As far as security controls, is this just username and password type security? Do we have any multiple factor security?
No, we don't have multiple factor security. This will be based on our Active Directory structure in Microsoft Windows. So you'll have to be a member of our Active Directory structure in order to access your OneDrive account or Office 365. And then the group memberships, the security group memberships on the county network will determine what you have access to in OneDrive for Business.
Okay, I think I know what most of that meant.
It,
Mr. Carter?
I wonder if we could get a more detailed copy from you of this. We hear what you're saying, but 6 months from now, a year, it can't be found.
Sure, we'll put something together for you.
We appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks, Andy. Mr. Quisenberry?
Yeah, Andy, you mentioned the 99.9% uptime. I just want people to understand, that means over the course of a year, they're down 9 hours. That's what that means. So if you think about something being unavailable about a day, work day, over the course of the whole year, that's what they're guaranteeing to us, no more than that.
Anything else? Okay, if this does get approved tonight, I'll have Deb bring these four budget amendments, or maybe slightly modified versions of these based on the newer numbers that Andy's come up with, to the full board for action then. No further comments. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Deb. And we'll move on to the county administrators' reports.
So you have at your desks the December 31st revenue projection and expenditure projection report for fiscal 2015. Even though the fiscal year closed December 31st, we keep the books open for another 60 days, so these numbers will change. So the projection shows you where we anticipate we'll end up for the fiscal 2015 year by the end of February. Right now, it appears that our revenue will come in at about 97.3%, which is close to where the projection has been the last couple months. As we told you at the board meeting last month, the one good news was the state started sending us our use tax, and in fact, it looks like we will receive more than budgeted for this year. And they, again, started sending some of our state salary reimbursement and charitable games license and off-track betting monies. So this is probably a fairly true picture of where we think revenues will end up for the fiscal year. I would point out the very bottom line is the $2.5 million bond refunding, so that skews the totals for fiscal 2015 by that amount. So what the real expenditures or real revenues are closer to $35 million based on the projection and the $37.9 million that's shown there. On the expenditure side, similarly, at this point, it looks to us like we will underspend in all areas of expenditure, bringing in the expenditure at right about 96.4% of the budget. And the overall projection at this point, based on the projection, we would end this fiscal year about $500,000 revenue positive, which is good news. I think realistically, this fiscal year should definitely end revenue positive. Whether it's by that large an amount or not is still subject to what we see in the next 60 days. But it's good to know that we are most likely to end fiscal 15 with a balanced budget. And then the budget change report is on the back page for your information.
Any questions? It's a pretty significant accomplishment, I think, to have gotten the fund balance back up a little bit in this year, so certainly appreciate the efforts of everybody who helped with that. We will accept those reports and place them on file, and we'll move on to the recommendation for elected official salaries. There's a discussion of this in the packet. Deb has offered two alternatives. We can consider either of those and or something completely different. I guess I would ask Deb to discuss her recommendation first and just let us know how you got here. Let's hear her description of her recommendation, then I'll take a motion. Thanks.
As has been done historically with regard to this elected official recommendation, we look at our comparable counties comps so you can see what county boards in counties that are similarly sized to Champaign County are paying for these elected officials in fiscal year 2016. 4 of the counties are smaller than Champaign: Peoria, McLean, Sangamon, and Rock Island, and Madison County is the next larger county to Champaign in the state of Illinois. So we're the 10th largest county, and Madison is the 9th largest. You will see that overall, Champaign County pays lower salaries than our comparable counties for the elected official positions. From a perspective of internal equity, we have looked at attempting to maintain some equity among the groups of elected officials. And historically, it has been viewed that the county clerk, treasurer, sheriff, and circuit clerk jobs are slightly larger than the jobs of auditor, coroner, and recorder. So ideally, we maintain a 4% variance between those two. So the auditor, coroner, and recorder are typically at 96% of what the treasurer and county clerk jobs and circuit clerk jobs. The sheriff is the highest in the group. Based on, and that's difficult to maintain because you set the salaries for one group in 2014, and now you're setting the salaries for another group in 2016. So developing a system for maintaining some equity among those positions is a challenge for you. This group that you're looking at right now is coming off a 4-year cycle of 0% increases. So they are being compensated the same in 2016 as they were in 2011. That was because they had better than growth reflected by the economy from 2008 to 2011, because when we set their salaries in 2008, we didn't know what was going to happen with the economy. Right now, if you set the salaries for this group of elected officials at 2% per year, they will maintain equity with the other group who you will set salaries for in 2018. And that's demonstrated on the top of the 3rd page of the memo. So we basically looked at internal and external equities to develop this salary recommendation. And moving forward and most of you will recall, we did the General Corporate Fund 5-year forecast last April. We will do it again this year. But one of the assumptions in moving forward is that, generally speaking, you anticipate that there's going to be 2% increases in salary growth, and that takes into consideration 13 different collective bargaining agreements and what happens with the non-bargaining employees, and applying that same basic general standard to this group of employees. I can tell you that most of your bargaining agreements at this point in time are for 3 years at a time, and on average are giving a similar type of compensation increase to the groups of employees. Because the 20-year incumbent elected recorder is retiring in 2016, I was also asked to look at a different or a decreased compensation for the recorder's position. And so you see that alternative consideration there. That is taking the recorder's position and comparing it to 2 similarly sized offices in county government, that of the supervisor of assessments and the director of planning and zoning. And if you wanted to look at a different internal type of equity, these are appointed officials who run offices that are similar in personnel and budget size to the recorder, and setting the recorder's salary at about $75,000 based on those comparables would seem like a reasonable thing to do. And so it's at $78,030 or $76,500 for the first year in this view of the recommendation. Another thing for you to remember in consideration is that I have included 2% for the board chair. You will be setting the board chair salary for 2 years because that's the next session of the board. And you have historically frozen the board chair's salary, so that's just something for you to be aware of as you make this decision. My recommendation would be to continue moving forward with the annual 2% increases for this group at this time. It ensures the maintenance of the equity between the 2 groups of elected officials whose salaries you set in offsetting years. They will still be compensated at lower levels in 2020 than most of the comparables are being compensated in 2016. So it seems like a reasonable recommendation to me.
Thanks, Deb. At this point, let me give a sort of a roadmap of how I'd like this to go. After talking to both caucuses, I'd like to get a motion for Deb's recommendation, which is the 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%. If that is moved and seconded, I'd open the floor for discussion. I'd like to take, I think there are sort of three issues here is what I'm hearing. One is whether the 2% is the right number for across the board. Should it be higher, should it be lower? Another is, should the recorder be treated differently than the other electeds? And if so, what should the recorder get paid? And then the third would be the board chair. So if we could sort of take those in order, I think it would help us get to maybe where we want to be. So if I could have a motion, I see that Mr. Carter, were you going to make that motion? Oh, sorry, Mr. Quisenberry.
I would like to make the motion, but I would like to leave the board chair out of the initial motion because I would expect that the board chair would recuse herself from that discussion since it's a conflict of interest for her. And
That's
good
correct.
point. Thank you. Never mind.
So are you willing to make that motion for the
Yes,
county
I'll
administrator's
make the
recommendation?
motion for the initial proposal of 2% across the board.
Okay, is there a second for that motion? Mr. Rosales seconds that. Okay, I'll open the floor for discussion on the issue in general, I guess, or if anyone wants to make an amendment regarding the 2%, which could be 0, 2, 2, 1, 1, whatever we want. We do have to decide for 4 years ahead because we're not allowed to change the salaries during the term. Mr. Harkey.
Yeah, okay, so I looked at these numbers, and I'm also a member of the Facilities Committee, which, as everyone is aware, is looking for more money. When we are approaching an idea of possibly raising sales tax, I think we also need to look at salaries. I think that these salaries have gotten extravagant compared to our own community. I think comparing elected officials from one county to another isn't really accurate because we're not competing with Peoria County for their elected officials to maybe come over here and run for office. It's not like a hired position, so I don't see that as a necessity. I also question the idea of, when we're talking about parity, cutting the recorder's salary alone. Also, I question the idea of basing that on the experience of the person who may or may not hold the office yet, as there still is an election coming with several people running for that office. So I am going to propose an 11% across the board cut on all 5 salaries with 0% increases, and I would speak more to that if I get a second.
Okay, we have an amendment made and seconded. That would be, so basically minus 11% in the first year and 0% in each of the 3 subsequent years.
Yes.
Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Carter.
And I've still been asking this question, and I can't figure out where the board member never listed over here as an elected official.
We are not deciding our salary at this point.
Well, how can you opt them out from the rest of the elected officials?
We typically do those at a different time of year. We'll do those when we're approaching the new board term. Right? When do we set that?
Well, how can you do that?
You basically set the board compensation at the before the decennial reorganization of the board. And if anyone wants to recommend changing board compensation, if you wanted to recommend it for the board members who are elected in November of 2016, you would have to do that by May. And starting in December 2016, half of the board would receive that compensation and the other half would receive the compensation that is in place today. So historically, you have not done that except at the 10-year decennial reorganization so that all board members are compensated at the same level.
Yeah, wait a minute. That's not the fact that I got to run. And I run every time what is that? Is that election or what?
Yeah, nobody's saying you're not an elected official, Mr. Carter. We're all elected officials.
I wasn't talking about the money. I'm talking about the fact is that you are not listing the county board members as elected officials. That's my question.
Okay, Mr. Carter, I I mean, I don't think anybody doubts that we're elected officials. So this is the list of officials whose salaries we're talking about right now. That's the only reason they're on this list.
Well, I'm trying to get us on the board because we've been offered that so long, and I've been asking this question. And the fact is, I sign an affidavit just like those guys do. I sign affidavit when I run and have it notarized just like they do.
Indeed, Mr. Carter, so did me too.
Well, but then when you come down here, you don't even, it's not even recognized.
Mr. Carter, this is a list of those countywide elected officials whose position we are considering salaries right now. I mean, the state's attorney's not on here either, and the state's attorney's elected.
You still is away from what I'm saying. I'm not challenging their proposition. The proposition is, why aren't we all elected officials?
And I'm telling you, we are all elected officials. We're just not on this list because this is only the list of people who were being asked to talk about their salaries tonight.
Okay, I guess I have to go to constitutional lawyer to get that answer.
Well, be my guest, Mr. Carter. We have an amendment for an 11% cut followed by 3 years of 0% increase. Mr. Shore.
Yeah, if I could just speak to it. I mean, we all know that the state's a mess. We talk about it literally every meeting we come to, and we talk a lot about shared sacrifice. And we have here positions where, you know, the full-time county-wides are making around double median family income in our county. And I think it's fair when we're discussing going before the voters and asking them for additional revenue to consider at this time asking those who are putting their names on the ballots for public service to consider decreasing their salary before we go forward and ask for more revenue. I will additionally note that if we're talking about are we going to be able to be competitive in terms of the candidates we're going to attract for this office, literally the only one that we've discussed, and we've openly discussed lowering the salary of the county recorder for the next term, and we have 5 people running for that. And the people that we haven't discussed lowering their salary for, we've got no opponents. So it seems to me that salary is not the thing that's driving people running for these offices.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Let's go to Ms. Bergson and then Mr. Hartke. And anybody else who wants to jump in on the first round.
If we're going to bring these people down to the median for the county, then are we going to bring our poor employees up to the median for the county? The people at the nursing home and whatnot.
Mr. Hartke.
I don't think that meets the budget thing we're trying to accomplish here. What we're looking at here in front of you that's gone around is some numbers about the kind of money this can potentially save the county. And over the 4 years of these people's office, it's nigh unto $250,000. I mean, that's a couple of these facilities projects that we're talking about we really need to move forward on. I think that if we find it's easier to make 2% increases on other people when we have more room in the budget, but we are going to be making increases on lower end. So to answer Astrid's question there a little bit. And one other thing when we talk about, you know, retention of countywide elected officials, we have in our recent history an example of a countywide elected official who had his salary raised, almost doubled over the course of his service, got reelected and left 3 days later for a higher paying job. So I don't think that salary was what was maintaining his employment here. I think these have gotten extravagant, and I think that the community would probably agree with it.
Thank you, Mr. Hartke. Anybody else? Mr. Rector.
Yeah, I'm not sure you take, pardon me, leadership that's been here this long and cut them 11%. It doesn't happen in the private sector if that company's performing. I understand we might have to go raise taxes, but I would not, I'm all for maybe 0%. But taking somebody's salary that's been a valued employee and cutting 11% is not right.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Anybody else on this? Mr. Quisenberry, and then Mr. McGuire.
Mrs. Shore, I'd like a clarification. The sheet that was sent around says it's the proposed Democratic Caucus 11% reduction plan. It was proposed to the caucus, but I don't believe the caucus voted on it. As Secretary, can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I'm sorry that that's confusing. The idea was it was proposed to the caucus, and then it just kind of got printed out that way. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, that's consistent.
Thanks. I think Mr. McGuire was next.
I guess, in listening to the discussion about this, I don't know if it's the countywide elected officials' responsibility to fund the county's facilities out of their wages, or cuts in their wages. I think it's the county's responsibility to do that. I really have a problem with that, considering the state likes to do that to the state employees or the university employees when they're looking for more funds for the general fund. So to start off with, the other thing is, I don't know how the mechanics of this will work. It would be unfair to penalize this group of countywide officials, and then I don't know how the mechanics would work for the other group of countywide officials to see their wages cut 11%, because the board that may be elected then may look at it and say something completely different. I think that would be completely unfair to them, this group.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Anybody else on the amendment? Mr. Quisenberry again.
Yeah, you know, I will say that I have been supportive of the reduction for the recorder, and I've come to that conclusion based on an analysis of the work requirements and the staff size and the responsibilities associated with it. I know these salaries are significant, but I would suggest that if you look at the city of Champaign, comparable roles, if you look at the university, comparable administrative roles, I'm not sure I would call them extravagant. I think they're strong salaries, but I'm not sure I agree with across the board reducing everything by 11%. I can justify that with a responsibility, from a responsibility standpoint with the recorder's office, and I think there's been an analysis to support that, but I'm not sure about the other one, so I'm not sure I can vote yes on all being reduced 11%.
Thank you, Mr. Quisenberry. Anybody else on the amendment? I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson and then Mr. Harper.
Thank you. Just briefly, you know, these positions are positions of responsibility. I think we can tell by the fruit that they bear that they all do a good job for this community, and they need to be compensated fairly. And when you look at the comparison of the other counties, our people are not at the top. They tend to be at the bottom in comparison, but they're competitive enough that I think we're able to get the talent that we do here. If we're looking to make these cuts, to say that we just go right across the board with these elected officials, I think is unfair. Maybe we need to look at our programs. I look at a 4-year projection here of about $250,000 savings by reducing the salaries of people who are productive and do good for this community. While I look at this same agenda package and I see that we're authorizing $100,000 a year for programs that help people who maybe aren't pillars in our community, maybe be causing problems in our community, but yet we're willing to invest in them. You know, it just seems contrary to me that we're willing to spend money on certain people in our community, but less on others who potentially are doing greater. But I think they're both important. But in that same light, I'm not going to support the board across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Harper, you're next.
Well, I just, a little clarification, I ask you when you're at caucus. Deb, isn't this just to get everything back in balance with the other group? We had the 0% freezes, if I remember right, during negotiations.
The two groups are currently in balance. If you wanted to maintain that balance, you would do 2% for at least the first 2 years for this group, and then if you wanted to do 0 or something different, you would have the opportunity to implement that same application with the other group in 2018.
Okay, that's what I thought, and I think it's only fair. Yeah, I think the salaries are very competitive. We're blessed with people that do a great job. But I think to maintain balance and don't have one group get cut 11% and another group going two more years at a 2% increase, I think we almost got to go with that 2% raise. And then in 2 years, if we want to start freezing it, we can do it then, in my opinion, so.
Thanks, Dan. Anybody else on the amendment? Mr. Schrader, and then Ms. Petrie.
Excuse me. I'm still dealing with a little bit of a cold, so bear with me. I'm not interested in supporting an across-the-board 11% reduction plan, just for a simple fact that when an administrator does comparables, there's really not that much you can go by, except for counties the same as population as we have. We are on the low end on those comparables. I think we really need to adequately financially back the positions that the county statutorily has. I'm not opposed to looking at the recorder for a reduction, but the rest, I think it's a bit draconian. And I do pay, there was a bit of a talk about how we're comparable or potentially anything comparable with how the state handles their finances, and I take umbrage to that. We're not even close to being comparable when it comes to taxation or anything else. The state holds its own candle, and they burn it on both ends, and there's nothing left. So there's absolutely no way you can compare this to what the states. If you want to raise taxes and you want to try and cut some of the salary, then you need to be consistent. And if you want to do that, then you're going to do the back end for 2018. Then you're going to cut those salaries in the back end and 11% too. So I don't know if this is really going to really shy anybody away from running for these elected countywide offices. I don't think anybody knows. But I can tell you this, I think we need to fairly compensate, like everybody else that works for this county, the people that do their jobs and they do them well. So I'm going to oppose this.
Thank you, John. Ms. Petrie.
Just a reminder, it was brought before the board about merging the recorder's office with the county clerk's office. And no matter how you slice and dice that particular salary, the saving basically would have been that whole salary, which is more than's projected in each of these columns on the bottom line. And Mr. Maxwell and I did go over to McLean County to find out just how bad or good that's working in that county. And what we discovered was indeed they were able to save that whole salary in the manner in which they merged that. So it confuses me a little bit that there wasn't the support to do that when there would have been a far greater saving than really quite a strong percentage reduction across the board with no differentiations going on. And so as we go ahead with our conversation related to salaries and our budget and our needs here in the county, maybe there are other aspects we ought to have in the pull back into the conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. Mr. Harkey?
Yeah, I don't want to drag this out, but I do want to answer directly respond to a couple of things. I think it's really irresponsible to base the salary for the next elected official on the current performance of the current elected. These positions are the people's. It is not the electeds. These are salaries for people who are elected by the people. These are not salaries necessarily of employees of ours that we're going to be competing to find better employees. Two, we do across the board all the time. We required a 4% across the board cut that was supposed to be equitable. I think now picking and choosing which elected officials get these so-called draconian cuts of 11%, I think picking and choosing them, I mean, we're picking and choosing winners there, which I thought some people were against. And then the other thing specifically on the recorder's office, no one has ever proven that that was going to save the entire recorder's salary, because you were going to have to hire some sort of deputy to work for the county clerk at some level of some salary. So that savings isn't the entire salary. Secondly, reducing the salary so we get some sort of parity as well as trying to save a little money is entirely different from eliminating a position that the people would have to vote for to eliminate. Thirdly, people can keep bringing up the elimination of the recorder's office all they want, but I think from the vote that went down in this room that is not going to happen. It's not even making it before the people, much less passed before the people. So I think we need to move beyond that and start dealing with the reality of our situation before us. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Harkey. Do we have anybody else on the amendment? Okay, so the amendment is, would be an 11% cut in the first year and 0% in each of the subsequent 3 years. Mr. Maxwell wants a roll call. Well, Mr. Harkey. Okay, would the clerk please call the roll on the amendment?
Mitchell? No. Petrie?
No.
Quisenberry? No. Rector?
No.
Rosales? No. Schrader?
No.
Schwartz? No. Shore? Weibel?
Yes.
Anderson? No. Bergson? No. Carter? Yes. Cowart? Yes. Esri?
No.
Harper?
No.
Harrison? Yes. Hartke?
Yes.
Jay? No. Maxwell?
No.
McGuire?
No.
Michaels? No. Alex?
No. Okay, the motion is, I count 16 to 6. The amendment fails. Okay, we're back to the main proposal. I would entertain any additional comments or additional amendments with regard to the overall number, with regard to the recorder, with regard to the county board chair, or anything else. Mr. Quisenberry.
Yeah, I'd like to propose an amendment, and I will speak to it once it's proposed. That amendment would be to reduce the recorder salary by 11% and hold all of these other salaries at 0% for the 4-year term.
Okay, that's amendment has been moved. I'm sorry, was that Mr. Rector? Seconded. Moved by Mr. Quisenberry, seconded by Mr. Rector. This would be 0% across the board and an 11% cut to the recorder's salary.
Only in 2016, of course.
Correct. A discussion on this, Mr. Quisenberry.
Yeah, I'm proposing that amendment, and I'll tell you why. I had originally come expecting to support the 2% increase, and with the exception of the 11% reduction initially for the coroner's office. But I am, sorry, the recorder's office. I have revised that opinion because I really don't know, while I'm not ready to reduce all of these by 11%, I also don't know what the next 2 to 4 years holds with regard to budgets. And I do think it would, I'm beginning to believe it might not be responsible to set a path for increasing these salaries over time when in fact there may be a need to not increase any of our staff salaries during that time period. I understand that it feels unfair to this particular group to suffer under that, but that's been true in this county and in this system that we have been working for the last, umpteen years, where if you're up during times of trouble, you have a problem, and if you're up when things look okay, you get 4 years of okay. And so after hearing the discussion on the previous amendment, that's why I've decided to propose my initial belief, but also hold the line on these salaries because of the unclear financial picture in the next 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Quisenberry. Anybody else like to speak to that? Mr. Mitchell.
I feel that cutting expenses is always a good thing because it benefits the taxpayers. I think, we had budget hearings in the summer, and at that point in time, maybe we should have considered taking an 11% cut across the board, everything that the county does, but we didn't. So I don't think that at this point in time that we need to just segregate certain people or certain offices out of the equation. And I think we need to look at that group simply because that's the group we had to look at from the last go-round. And I think we treat everybody fairly and equitably.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Anybody, Mr. Maxwell?
I'd like more time to think about this. Is it possible to move to defer this until the February meeting?
It's possible.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Maxwell, seconded by Mr. Hartke. Mr. Weibel.
I'm going to vote against this motion to defer because it still has to go through the county board. It'd be more appropriate to defer it at the county board, so I would welcome it. I would hope we continue to discuss it here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Weibel. Anybody else on the motion to defer? Ms. Bergson. Thank you, Ms. Bergson. Anybody else on the motion to defer? Seeing no further comments, I would ask all those in favor of the motion to defer to the February Committee of the Whole meeting, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. I'm sorry, I'm going to need division. Can I get show of hands for deferral?
Is this for deferral?
Deferral. For deferral. Motion carries. Thank you. That'll be deferred to the February Committee of the Whole. Ms. Busey, would you like to say something? Absolutely.
Since you've deferred it, I would ask all of you, county board members, to, in addition to just looking at the salaries of these elected officials that you're deciding, to look at the Freedom of Information Act webpage on the county's website, to look at the listing of employees with compensation over $75,000. I would like you to have some perspective of what other county employees are being paid in comparison to the salaries that you're setting for these elected officials. So if you would please do that before the February COW, I think that would be helpful for you to have more perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Busey. Mr. Rector?
So just so I understand, do we just defer the vote on that last amendment and the amendment before that? What did we actually defer, just so I understand, Chris?
We deferred the item in the condition it was in at the time of the motion to defer. So there's an amendment on the main motion, and the amendment will be on the floor when we come back. Anybody else on this issue?
It's on the county's website. On the left-hand side, there's a Freedom of Information Act webpage. Click on that, and then you'll see there's a listing of all employees with total compensation in excess of $75,000.
Anybody else on this issue, which we're not talking about anymore? Okay, seeing no further hands raised, I will move on to the chair's report. This will be brief. I just want to talk briefly about the nursing home revenue anticipation notes. As you remember, this was recommended by the Finance Committee last month. It was sent to the full board last month. At the full board, it failed to get 15 votes. There was a little bit of question about what the required margin for passage was. It turned out it was 15 votes, so that motion failed. We did not authorize MPA to seek revenue anticipation notes. Based on what Mr. Gima has said tonight, I think it is clearly likely that we will see payment delays. So since the board did not approve that, I would certainly be interested in hearing from any board members here or privately in terms of how we would advise MPA to proceed if we do have payment delays. If I do hear from board members that there's an interest in revisiting the revenue anticipation notes, that would have to be done by the full board since it was voted down by the full board. There are two ways that this could be considered at the upcoming full board meeting. One would be someone who voted no could make a motion to reconsider. that would require a two-thirds vote and would bring it back to the full, would bring the item back up, at which point it would require 15 votes to pass. The other mechanism would be someone could move to suspend the rules that, to consider business which has already been voted on. That would also require a two-thirds majority, and the final vote would still require 15 votes. So I guess the bottom line is, if, as of the county board meeting next Thursday, there are 15 people who want to authorize MPA to issue revenue anticipation notes, we have ways of making that happen. If there aren't, then we won't. And our default advice to MPA, I guess, as I understand it, is push out payments to vendors at a significantly higher interest rate than we would probably expect to pay a bank for the revenue anticipation notes. So I am not certainly going to tell the county board how to vote on this, but if we are not going to, if we're going to continue to not support the concept of revenue anticipation notes, I would like to at least be able to give some guidance to MPA as far as what we would like them to do as an alternative. So keep that in mind. We will put that on, I will put it on the agenda for the full board meeting just in case, although it would still, because we couldn't act on it if it were not on the agenda, but obviously it would require a motion to reconsider, or it would require a motion to suspend the rules in order to vote on it again, because as far as I'm concerned, I mean, there have been some minor change, there can be some minor changes made to the proposal, but I think in substance it's already been acted on. Ms. Schwartz.
So just to clarify, motion to reconsider can be by somebody who specifically voted no, or anybody who didn't vote yes? Because I wasn't here to vote, so.
I believe it has to be made by someone who voted and who voted on the,
No.
excuse me, on the prevailing side, which was no. However, again, a motion to suspend the rules could be made by anybody, and the criteria for passage of the two is identical. So I think it's a distinction without a difference. Yeah, it's 15 votes no matter what. Okay, that is all for the chair's report. Items for consent are A, 2, and 3, D, 1 through 8, with the exception of 6, E1, F1, and that's it. That concludes finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alex. Mr. Quisenberry. Other business is the closed session. Okay, Mr. Quisenberry will read the direction for our closed session.
I move that we enter into closed session pursuant to 5 ALCS 120/2, parentheses C3, to consider the discipline, performance, or removal of the occupant of a public office. I further move that the following individuals remain present: the county's legal counsel, the county administrator, the county auditor, the county treasurer, and the recording secretary.
All right, is there a second to that? Mr. Esri, would the clerk please call the roll?
Mitchell? Quisenberry? Rector? Rosales? Schrader?
Yes.
Schwartz? Shore? Weibel? Alex? Anderson? Berkson? Carter? Cowart? Esri? Harper? Harrison? Hartke? Jay? Maxwell? McGuire?
Yes.
Michaels? Petrie?
Yes, and I do want to announce that we will adjourn at the end of the closed session.